What happens when a CEO orders a meal at his own diner and discovers the truth behind the smiles? Albert, the CEO of a small diner chain with 20 locations, had built his business from the ground up over the last decade. He took great pride in fostering a family-friendly atmosphere, but lately, something felt off. Customer complaints about slow service and rude staff had been piling up, and employee turnover was at an all-time high. His regional managers assured him that everything was fine, yet the reports didn't align with the whispers he had been hearing. Frustrated and determined to uncover the truth, Albert decided to go undercover at one of his locations. He chose a diner in a small town 3 hours away from his corporate office, far enough that no one would recognize him. Most of his employees had never met him in person. To blend in, he grew out a scruffy beard, swapped his tailored suits for a worn-out hoodie and jeans, and put on a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. He looked nothing like the polished executive featured on the company website. At lunchtime, he stepped into the diner, where the air buzzed with chatter and the clinking of dishes. The dining area appeared clean but dated, the booth slightly worn. It wasn't terrible, but it lacked the warm, welcoming feel Albert had envisioned when he first started the company. A young waitress with tired eyes approached him, her name tag reading Lisa. "Hi there, welcome," she greeted him, her voice cheerful but strained. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Albert noticed the faint bags under her eyes and the hesitation in her smile. Something about her seemed off, but he brushed it aside. "Just coffee, thanks," he said, sliding into a booth near the window. Lisa nodded and hurried off, weaving between tables with practiced efficiency. Albert watched as she juggled multiple orders, refilled drinks, and picked up plates from the kitchen. She was clearly overworked, yet she never let her frustration show to the customers. When Lisa returned with his coffee, Albert ordered a burger and fries. As Lisa scribbled on her notepad, a man's voice boomed from the kitchen.
"Lisa, what's taking so long? You're falling behind again."
The voice belonged to a short, stocky man in his 40s, wearing a stained apron. Albert guessed he was the shift manager. He hadn't introduced himself when Albert walked in, something Albert made a note of. Lisa flinched at the harsh tone but nodded quickly. "Coming right up," she called back, her voice cracking slightly. Albert frowned. He had built this business on the foundation that employees should feel valued, not be rated in front of customers. He sipped his coffee and decided to observe a little longer. As he waited for his food, he overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables. A family in the booth behind him complained about how long they had been waiting for their meal. A pair of teenagers whispered about how rude the manager had been to their waitress earlier. The atmosphere felt tense, far from the warm, welcoming diner experience Albert had envisioned. When Lisa finally brought out his burger, she offered a quiet apology. "Sorry about the wait," she murmured, avoiding eye contact. "No worries," Albert replied with a small smile. "You're doing great." Her eyes flicked up, surprised, before she nodded and hurried off again. Albert had barely taken a bite when he heard muffled sobbing coming from the kitchen. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The sound grew louder, unmistakable now. It was Lisa. He set his fork down and strained to listen. "I'm trying my best, okay?" Her voice cracked through the thin walls. "I haven't had a break in 6 hours, and I'm doing everything I can." The manager's voice cut in, dismissive and sharp. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you're in the wrong job. We don't have time for excuses." Albert's stomach twisted. He couldn't sit still. Sliding out of the booth, he left his half-eaten burger behind and strode toward the kitchen door. What he saw made his chest tighten. Lisa stood with trembling hands, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. The manager loomed over her, arms crossed, his face twisted in frustration. Two cooks kept their heads down, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to step in. Albert clenched his fists, his heart pounding. This wasn't the company he had built. "Is there a problem here?" Albert asked, his voice calm but firm. The manager turned, startled. No, just a little miscommunication. Lisa shook her head, tears still pooling in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Albert looked at her, then back at the manager. He didn't reveal who he was just yet. Instead, he said, "She looks like she needs a break. Why don't you let her sit down for a few minutes?" The manager scoffed. "We're short-staffed. There's no time for breaks during the rush." Albert's jaw tightened. "There's always time to treat people with respect," he said evenly. The tension in the room thickened as Albert held the manager's gaze. He knew he couldn't stay silent much longer. The manager's lips pressed into a thin line, but before he could respond, one of the cooks, a wiry young man with a nervous energy, spoke up. "Lisa's been non-stop since she clocked in. She hasn't even had time to grab a drink of water." His voice was hesitant, but there was a quiet defiance in his tone. The manager shot him a glare.
Stay out of it, Connor.
Focus on your station. Albert's eyes flicked to Connor, then back to the manager. And who's in charge of making sure your team can focus? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like the pressure is coming from how this place is being run. The manager's face flushed, his bravado slipping for a moment. Look, I'm just doing my job. If people can't handle it, that's not on me. Albert's gaze hardened. We'll see about that. Lisa, still wiping her eyes, looked at Albert with confusion and a hint of gratitude. I'll be fine, she muttered, though her voice wavered. She turned toward the door, but Albert gently stopped her. Take 5, he said softly.
You vet inte.
The manager started to protest, but Albert held up a hand, his tone leaving no room for argument. She's taking a break. Now. Lisa hesitated, glancing nervously between Albert and the manager before nodding and slipping past the swinging kitchen doors. Albert turned his attention back to the manager, his voice calm but steely. What's your name? Nicole, the man replied, his tone defensive. And who are you to come in here and tell me how to run my shift? Albert ignored the question. How long have you been the manager here, Nicole? Nicole folded his arms. About 2 years. And I've kept this place running just fine. So I don't need some random customer stepping in. And you call this fine? Albert interrupted, his voice rising slightly. Your staff is overworked, your customers are complaining, and you're berating people in the middle of their shifts. That's not fine. It's a mess. Nicole opened his mouth to argue, but Albert cut him off again. You might want to think about how you're treating people, because I guarantee if I were your boss, this wouldn't fly. Nicole's face paled slightly, but he quickly tried to mask it with a scoff. Right. Well, you're not my boss, so. Before he could finish, the kitchen door swung open, and Lisa reappeared, her face slightly more composed. She kept her head down as she walked past Nicole and back toward the dining area. Albert decided it was time to step back and observe again. For now. He gave Nicole one last pointed look before turning and following Lisa into the dining room. Back at his booth, Albert watched as Lisa returned to her routine. She moved a little slower now, her exhaustion more apparent, but she still managed a small smile for every customer she served. Albert noticed her taking extra care with a young mother struggling to keep her toddler entertained, offering crayons and a paper menu for the child to color on. He also noticed Nicole glaring at her from the kitchen window. Albert took out his phone and discreetly started taking notes. He jotted down everything he'd observed, Nicole's behavior, Lisa's workload, the complaints from customers. He also noted Connor's quiet defense of his co-worker. After finishing his meal, Albert flagged Lisa down. Can I get the check? He asked, keeping his tone light. She nodded and quickly brought it over along with the receipt. Thanks for stopping by. Sorry again about earlier, she said quietly. No need to apologize, Albert replied, slipping some cash into the billfold. You're doing great. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she offered a small genuine smile. Thank you. As she walked away, Albert made a decision. He wasn't done here. Not by a long shot. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and made his way to the door. But before leaving, he paused and glanced back at the dining room. Lisa was refilling a customer's coffee, her movements careful but efficient. Nicole was barking orders at Connor in the kitchen. Albert's jaw tightened. He pushed open the door and stepped outside, pulling out his phone. "Janet," he said when his assistant answered. "I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow and get me everything we have on the staff at the suburban location. Employee files, performance reviews, all of it." "Got it," Janet replied without hesitation.
Anüting Else.
Albert glanced back at the diner one last time before walking to his car. "Yeah," he said. "Make sure my regional managers are ready for a meeting. We need to talk." He hung up and slid into the driver's seat, his mind already racing with plans. Tomorrow, Albert wasn't just going to observe. He was going to take action. The next morning, Albert arrived at the diner just after opening, wearing the same scruffy disguise as the day before. This time, he carried a small notebook in his pocket and a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't here to sit on the sidelines anymore.
The morning shift was quicker, giving Albert the chance to observe without the chaos of a lunch rush.
Lisa was already on the floor, her movements deliberate but slower than the day before. She looked even more drained, her smile thinner. Nicole wasn't in sight yet, but Connor was in the kitchen, prepping ingredients. Albert waited until Lisa passed by with a coffee pot before calling her over. "Hey Lisa," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Do you have a second?" She hesitated, glancing at the few customers scattered around the diner. Sure, but I can't stay long. We're short-staffed again." "I won't keep you," Albert promised. "I just wanted to ask, how long have you been working here?" She blinked at the question, clearly caught off guard. "About 8 months." "Why?" Albert leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You seem like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. Is it always this busy?" Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting toward the kitchen window. "It's not always the customers. Sometimes it's," she trailed off, biting her lip. "It's Nicole, isn't it?" Albert asked gently. Her head snapped up, and for a moment, she looked panicked. "I shouldn't." "You don't have to say anything," Albert interrupted, keeping his voice soft. "I just want to understand what it's like for you here." Lisa hesitated again, then sighed. "It's not just her. It's everything. We're always short-staffed, and when things get hectic, she just makes it worse. I know she's under pressure too, but it feels like we're always the ones paying for it." Albert nodded, his mind racing. He decided to push a little further. "What about Connor? He seems like he tries to help." Lisa's expression softened slightly. "Connor's great. He's only been here a few months, but he's one of the few people who actually cares. He covers for people when they're struggling. Honestly, if it weren't for him, I probably would have quit by now." Before Albert could ask any more questions, the kitchen door swung open, and Nicole strode out, her presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Lisa's shoulders tensed, and she quickly excused herself to refill a customer's coffee. Nicole didn't seem to notice Albert as she barked instructions at Connor, who nodded silently while dicing vegetables. Albert's jaw tightened as he watched. This wasn't just stress, this was a pattern. Albert let the morning play out, observing how Nicole interacted with the staff and how the team managed despite the clear tension. By the time the lunch rush started, the diner was back to its usual pace, and Lisa was running between tables again. It wasn't long before the first incident occurred. A customer, an older man in a flannel shirt, flagged Lisa down to complain about his eggs being overcooked. Lisa apologized and offered to have the kitchen remake them. "Can you just do your job right the first time?" the man grumbled. Lisa's face flushed, but she kept her composure. "I'm really sorry about that. I'll get it fixed right away. Nicole, who had overheard the exchange, stormed out of the kitchen. What's the problem here? She demanded, glaring at Lisa. It's fine, the customer replied, waving her off. She's handling it. Nicole turned to Lisa anyway. How many times do I have to tell you to double-check the orders before they go out? This is basic stuff. Albert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, drawing everyone's attention. That's enough, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the room. Nicole turned to Albert, her face twisting in annoyance. And who the hell do you think you are? Albert reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal his company ID. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. I'm Albert, he said, locking eyes with Nicole. I own this diner. And 13 others just like it. The room went silent. Lisa froze mid-step, her eyes wide. Connor peeked out from the kitchen, his knife still in hand. Even the customers seemed to hold their breath. Nicole's face went pale, then flushed red. I didn't realize. No, you didn't, Albert cut her off. Because if you had, you wouldn't be treating my staff like this. Or my customers. Nicole stammered, but Albert didn't give her a chance to recover. Let's talk in the back, he said sharply, motioning toward the office. Nicole hesitated, then nodded stiffly and walked toward the kitchen. Albert followed, pausing only to glance at Lisa. I won't let this slide. In the office, Albert shut the door and turned to Nicole. Do you have any idea how out of line you've been? He asked, his voice low but firm. Nicole opened her mouth, but Albert held up a hand. Save it. I've seen enough. You've been with this company for 2 years, and in that time, you've managed to create a toxic environment for your team. Do you have any idea what that does to morale? To customer service? To the business? Nicole looked down, her bravado completely gone. I get it. This job isn't easy, Albert continued, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people the way you do. Nicole swallowed hard. I can do better. You're done, Albert interrupted, his voice final. I'm letting you go, effective immediately. Nicole's head shot up, her eyes wide. Wait, you can't. I can, Albert said firmly, and I will. I'll make sure HR processes your severance package, but you're no longer part of this company.
Nicole stotere for a moment, frozen, bevor nodding stiffly and walking out of the office without another word.
Albert exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He didn't relish firing people, but this was necessary. When he stepped back into the dining area, all eyes were on him. Lisa and Connor stood near the kitchen, their expressions a mix of shock and cautious hope. Albert took a deep breath and addressed the room. I want to thank everyone for their hard work, he said, his voice steady. Things are going to change around here, starting today. He looked directly at Lisa and Connor. You two, meet me after your shift. We need to talk. The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a buzz of curiosity and relief. Albert knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was steering his company in the right direction. After the last customer left and the lights were dimmed in the dining area, Lisa and Connor stood awkwardly by the counter, waiting for Albert to speak. The hum of the kitchen appliances was the only sound in the room. Both looked exhausted, but there was a cautious hope in their expressions. Albert had spent the rest of the day observing without interfering further, but now it was time to act. All right, let's sit, Albert said, motioning to a booth near the back. He slid into one side while Lisa and Connor hesitated before taking the other. Albert leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. First, I want to say thank you. I know today was rough, especially with everything going on, but you handled yourselves with professionalism and care. That's more than I can say for some of the leadership this place has had. Lisa glanced at Connor, unsure how to respond, while Connor fidgeted with the edge of his apron. I didn't know things had gotten this bad, Albert admitted, his voice softer now. That's on me. I've been too distant. I built this company to be a place where people feel valued, employees and customers, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. Lisa finally spoke, her voice hesitant. It's not all bad. I mean, I've worked worse jobs, but it's been hard. I do love the customers, though. I just wish. She trailed off, unsure if she should say more. Wish what? Albert asked gently. She swallowed. I just wish it felt like someone cared, you know? Like really cared about us. Not just about the numbers or how fast we can turn tables. Albert nodded, letting her words sink in. And Connor, what about you? Connor looked up, his voice quiet but steady. Honestly, I didn't plan to stay long. But I couldn't leave, not with how much Lisa and the others have to deal with. Someone needs to have their back. Albert felt a pang of guilt. These two were the backbone of this place, and they'd been holding it together while he had been sitting in an office, trusting reports and spreadsheets. Well, that changes now, Albert said firmly. But I'm not just going to tell you things will improve, I'm going to show you. Both Lisa and Connor looked at him, curiosity and skepticism flickering in their eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Albert continued. First, I'm bringing in a new manager, someone with experience but also someone who knows how to lead with respect. In the meantime, I'll personally oversee things here until we get everything on track.
Lisa's eyes widened. You mean, Jure staying?
Albert nodded.
For as long as it takes.
Connor tilted his head.
And what about Nicole?
She's not coming back, Albert said simply. I don't tolerate that kind of behavior, and neither should you. Connor let out a small breath of relief, while Lisa's shoulders sagged as if a weight had been lifted. Second, Albert added, I'm revisiting the staffing structure. No more being short-staffed during peak hours. We'll hire more people, and I'll make sure everyone gets proper breaks. You can't take care of customers if you're running on empty. Lisa gave a small smile. That would be amazing. Third, Albert said, his tone softening, I want to reward the two of you for everything you've done to keep this place afloat. Lisa and Connor exchanged surprised looks. Reward us? Lisa asked cautiously. Albert nodded. Connor, you've shown incredible loyalty and leadership, even in the short time you've been here. I'm promoting you to assistant manager. You'll get a raise and more consistent hours. Connor's jaw dropped.
Wait, are you serious?
I've never managed anything before. Albert smiled. You're already doing it. You've been stepping up when no one else would. That's what leadership looks like.